Yeah, sure. So all the people should upgrade our Nethermind nodes to 1.11.2 version. And it was quite random that sometimes on the previous version we can skip the validation of proof of work. Yeah, and that is all. Łukasz, do you want to add something about it?
So what's the version that people should upgrade to?
I
1.11.2.
Yeah.
Okay, 1.11.2. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for the update. So, people, please upgrade if you're running Nethermind, and in the next call or the one after, we'll probably go into more details and the actual vulnerability itself. Cool. I guess first on the agenda, we have updates around the merge and interoperability between the different clients on the execution and consensus layer. Mikhail, do you want to just give a quick high-level overview of the different updates you had?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tim. Had been work on the drop edition of this engine API, and I think it will be published pretty soon, probably this day or early next week. Matt, do you think how much time do we need to do this? If we assume that it's ready, I mean, the document, I think it should be straightforward, right?
I can finish reading today.
Sorry?
Oh, yeah, we didn't really.
Can you repeat this, please? Yeah. Okay.
I think I heard today as part of his sentence, but
right.
Not 100% sure.
Okay, cool. A part of this engine API stuff, there is a couple of updates that I would like to share here. First is the proposal on using the hard-coded terminal total difficulty in both clients, in the consensus client and in the execution client. Here is the link to the pull request. Again, the beacon spec. It has the link to the pull request I've made to the EIP as well. And you may go there and read for the details and rationale behind this. in general is reducing the complexity and protecting us from various edge cases that could arise around implementation and usage of the dynamic terminal total difficulty that we previously had in the stack. So another thing, this is a small kind of thing, is the extra data are brought back. So the deprecation of extra data field has been removed from the EIP, and it's been added to the execution payload. So it's back again, and yeah, the rationale here is that it's useful in investigations of various incidents on the mainnet, as it's the default usage for the extra data is to just express the client version, which is pretty helpful. So what's next here? Yeah. Also, in general, about the merge interop specs, I think we will have them and their versions settled down and published like in the middle of the next week, probably early next week. So stay tuned on that. Yeah, this is with regarding to updates. I have also want to make one proposal here and to hear from client devs what they're thinking about it. This is like, yeah, sure. This is about message ordering between the consensus and execution clients, like the order of engine API calls to be more strict. And for the interop thing, the proposal is to use synchronous calls on the consensus client side, which means that if the call is made, the consensus client just waits for the response before moving forward with its flow of block processing or block production or any other stuff or the fork choice. The reason here is that it's just like the easiest way to handle the message ordering stuff. And I think it's reasonable to simplify this part for the interop. And we can further discuss the production ready solution for this part of the protocol and to not focus on that just during the interop. I think it's not super important for interop to be done. So that's just the proposal. What do people think about it?
Oh, sorry, something with my internet didn't hear you that well. You're mentioning changing something to synchronous. Which one exactly?
The consensus client will synchronously make the engine API calls. So it will send the request and wait for response instead of like send one request, then go to then get back to the like usual block process flow and send in one another request without waiting for the previous one to get processed. And that could lead to the mess around the message ordering and some inconsistencies if we don't have like a strict mechanism specified to preserve the order of messages. And that's just a workaround for the interop, just a temporal solution to not like get into discussion and get into specification and implementation of any message consistency mechanism that is like more sophisticated than just synchronous calls. So that's the proposal.
Yeah, so we have this kind of asynchronicity on the, let's say, not transport layer, right, like you're saying, but on the protocol layer, like prepared payload, get payload gives us some kind of asynchronicity, and the execute payload and then consensus validated and I don't remember the last one. Also validated message would be giving us asynchronicity on the protocol level, but not on transport layer level, right?
It depends on the transport, but yeah, right. So we have this asynchronicity, and we want to have it, but it like implies that we need to deal with the order of messages, and it needs to be preserved. Like if you're receiving like the message about like some payload, some child payload, while the parent payload hasn't been yet processed, that could be a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
this is just an example.
I'm totally for it. So when we want asynchronicity, we should just implement it in the like protocol level and not rely on the transport level for that.
Oh yeah, right.
So I'm all for it. I'm all for it.
Cool.
Does anyone disagree with that? Oh, Danny, you kind of came on, but we didn't hear you.
Oh, I agree that it makes sense as like an iterative step. Get it right in a synchronous method, and then layer asynchrony in where it makes sense.
Cool. Okay.
I also need to like just let. Yeah, this will go. I mean, this requirement will be exposed in the kind of merge interop meta spec. So, like the consensus client developers will have it there. Oh. That's pretty much it from my side.
Okay, and I guess I just had one question to make sure it's clear. So the decision for the to hard code the terminal total difficulty, it seemed like there was mostly consensus on that on Discord, but I'm curious if anyone like feels otherwise, because I as I understand it, the trade-off is then you just need to put out like an extra release potentially which has that that terminal total difficulty hard coded. Is that right?
I think there is a couple of options here. One option is to make a release with this total difficulty like hard coded, but with some like pretty advanced value. So we definitely sure that the merge fork on the beacon chain happens before this total difficulty hits on the mainnet. The other option is to have like a couple of releases. One is to bring this merge hard fork on and wait for the hard fork, and then another one that just releases the clients with this total difficulty value hard coded. That's kind of two options here. And this second option, actually the first release potentially not affects the execution clients.
Right.
This is yet to figure out, but that might work this way. So we will have like only one release, as we used to have like with this dynamic total difficulty for the execution clients. So if it even reduces the complexity of releasing this stuff at all, I mean like removing this one extra release from the execution client side.
Got it. Okay, and yeah, we don't need to necessarily decide that as we're making the change in the spec, basically.
The risk in doing one release is that you have to forecast total difficulty in a longer time period, which could be subject to attack or just high variance. I think I personally would take the hit and just do one release, because there also is specified the manual override in the event of an attack, or say terminal total difficulty or total difficulty dropping lower and lower, or the difficulty each block dropping lower and lower, so it takes a really long time. So there is a manual override there, which I think I'd prefer instead of doing two releases.
Got it.
have you thought about the other way around? That miner would speed up the block times, forge the timestamp to create a higher difficulty chain?
We have discussed that. Is it actually practical without? Can you actually spoof the network in doing so?
Yes.
Or would timestamps like that be rejected?
I think it would be possible.
Won't it require?
But what's the problem with that? What's the problem with that? Then the merge happens a bit earlier. So
If someone would mine their own chain, a separate chain with higher difficulty, and then, I don't know, drop it on everyone. I'm not sure.
Well-
It's just a
well, a
thought.
51% attack essentially.
Won't they need like the bigger hashing power then
Yeah.
to keep mining this?
Yeah, it'd be a 51% attack, and same as any other 51% attack where you just censor blocks that aren't part of your 51%.
There's two sequences of events. The beacon chain hard forks to actually, update the data structures to allow for the payload, and it's empty. And then after that, the terminal total difficulty is hit, and the execution layer payload is inserted into the beacon chain. And so the risk on an acceleration would be if they could hit terminal total difficulty prior to the actual beacon chain fork, because then I think the fork would end up, once the fork happened, the transition would happen immediately and happen on a past block. So there is like a little bit of an attack there.
I see. The issue here is because the beacon chain does not time its fork based on the execution engine's total difficulty.
Right. Yeah.
Then we can't hear you.
I can hear Dano. Dano.
That's weird. I can't hear Danny. Oh, now I can.
I'm gonna go somewhere else in my house.
I think it's just Tim. Everybody else can hear you.
No, I can't either.
Yeah, me too. Me neither.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's better.
But yes, I think, Micah, I think you're correct where the beacon chain upgrade is triggered by, I assume, epoch or slot number. And yeah, it's not triggered by the total difficulty itself.
Sorry, correct.
I see. So the real source of all these problems then is the fact that the beacon chain and execution chain are forking on different metrics, and those, no matter what those metrics are, there's a possibility that they will diverge, and one will happen before or after the other, and we need them to happen in the correct order, right? Beacon chain first.
Correct.
Is there any reason we can't just do the beacon chain fork months in advance? Like, do we need to wait until just before?
Yeah, I mean that's the Mikhail argument of 2 releases. And I wouldn't want to do 2 releases in like a 2-week timestamp, but if we did time it such that the beacon chain forked months before, I think that's a much more palatable to release schedule.
Is there an argument against that, other than just does the beacon chain actually need 2 releases, or would it just be the beacon chain releases and then 2 months later the execution chain releases?
No, they'd both need to know the terminal total difficulty.
Right, and it should
I see.
be
So
like synchronized.
I see. So the beacon chain releases, and then we decide the terminal total difficulty, and then we need a release of both beacon or consensus and execution clients. Is that correct?
Yes. We'll need this, if we follow this path, we will need a small tweak in beacon chain stack to be sure that Sorry, Danny.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So, but it's doable completely. It's really straightforward. This is to my understanding in the current moment of time. I haven't like thought much about this scenario.
Is there any reason we can't do the consensus client update or fork or whatever long in advance, like let's say next week? Just throwing it out there. Is there some reason that we need to do it some kind of near the actual proof of stake switch, or can we do it anytime prior?
I think it just makes the timelines longer, right? That would be the only reason. Like if you have to wait 2 months, then that's 2 months extra to the merge.
Yeah,
Sure, but I'm saying like we could. Can we just do the consensus client update now, like whatever the next patch goes out
Well,
for
isn't-
it? That's.
But isn't the blocker is like setting on one spec that we're all happy with? Like if you do it now, then in 2 months you might come up with some changes and like, oh, now it's too late. We already like.
I see.
right.
So
I'd wanna
the
go
block-
once we
deeper
do
in the
this-
engineering cycle,
Sorry, what was that, Denny?
I'd want to be much deeper in the engineering cycle before we would release on the Beacon chain in production.
Right, and
Sure. So
both
the
clients. I'm sorry.
I just want just to make sure I understand here. When this consensus client goes out, that is the start of the merge, but there is not any sort of time constraint between when this new consensus client goes out and when the execution client eventually goes out and when the hard
No.
fork happens. Like that duration can be whatever we want. It just needs to be in that
Yes.
order. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, these both softwares should be tested with each other, like with the most recent version of each other before making these releases.
Right. And I think in the
I see. So
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, in the next couple months, as we're working on this, it probably makes sense to maybe default to hard coding the total difficulty because it'll be mostly on devnets and whatnot. And as we start as we're further down with the spec and we start actually thinking about how to release this on mainnet, I feel like we'll have a much more context about it once we've actually like implemented it in the happy path.
So I agree that we shouldn't hold up devnets for this, but at the same time, I think we do want to test the production code paths as soon as and early as possible. Like I don't want to wait until the last minute to change the way we do our releases and then have like, it's only run on Gurley or whatever. We want it. Ideally, every testnet will see this mechanism for hard forking. So
here's one thing I don't understand. Why are we talking about like 1 month to like change a single number in the execution client? Like it feels to me, yeah, I agree. Like cutting a new release is something difficult, but not if the change is literally a single number. Like it's exactly what you're gonna release.
No,
it's
it's
just
coordination.
putting in that number.
Yeah, it's not the time to do the release. Obviously, that can be done in a day or two. It's getting everybody to upgrade to the release, to read the blog post. I do think if we wanted to go the 2 release route, we can get around that, where we tell people like first release is out on the date X, second release is out on date Y, so they know that they should be expecting 2 release. But there's just the risk that like, yeah, every time we do releases, people don't upgrade and they don't get the memo. And if there's 2 of them, there's just the risk that like they've updated to the first one and they're not aware that they need to upgrade again. But I don't think it's not a technical barrier. It's a dissemination.
Yeah, but even that, if you have made it very clear, hey, in the next week there will be a release that like you need to install, then what's really the percentage of people who don't get that? And should they really be maintaining Ethereum nodes?
I mean, just to give a recent example, Geth basically did that a few weeks ago, and 2 major mining pools had not upgraded, right? again, it's not like an impossible problem, but it is something that
Well, luckily, it doesn't matter if the mining pools don't do it. In this case.
Sure. I agree, Donkred, that it might be the most palatable solution, and you can orchestrate and make sure to communicate well. But it's definitely a consideration, and
Yeah.
I also think that we don't necessarily need to decide right now. I do. We can spend a little bit of time over the next few days to think through whether the dynamic setting of terminal total difficulty can be done actually in a tractable way. There was an issue that emerged that kind of highlighted there might be a number of corner cases here. So we can think through it and try to make sure that we definitely want to scrap it by mid next week. And then if so, then we're kind of working with the static, which I think is also solves a couple of other problems.
What problems does static total difficulty solve?
Primarily when this Donker brought this up on All Core Devs 2 weeks ago. But if the execution engine, if a user naively runs an execution engine and doesn't connect the beacon node, and it was relying on being told from the beacon node the terminal total difficulty and it never connected to one, then it would literally just follow the proof of work chain forever, and not following the transition would not show up as a failure to them, even if they wanted to be following the transition. Whereas if there was a terminal total difficulty released in the execution engine, then they would see essentially a failure at the point of the transition and not see any new blocks. That would be essentially an alert that something's wrong, and then they'd figure out that they need to run their beacon node. That's the primary thing it solves, other than some of the corner cases with sync that we identified a couple days ago.
Didn't we come up with an alternative potential solution where we set the execution client such that if you are not connected to a consensus client by this difficulty, then shut down? And that just means like you must be connected to the network, basically.
Yeah, there is. There are also some other like details and implications of these dynamic total difficulty stuff. So they are just exposed in the issue. I mean, they are just described in details. You can drop it, the link.
Yeah, someone can drop a link. That'd be great. I'm just at the moment, it sounds like dynamic total difficulty is the better option. So I'd like to better understand what the arguments against that are. Since it sounds like there are some, and I just don't understand them.
Yeah, I would suggest we take it to that issue and move on to other stuff.
Yeah, Mikhail already linked it in the chat, so it's PR 2605 on the consensus specs, and that links to another issue as part of its rationale. Oh, and then there's also PR 2603. Okay,
that's the issue with the rationale.
Okay, cool. Oh, I guess anything else on this specific topic? If not,
about the merge, I opened this issue on the consensus specs repository about transaction typing. So the API and the execution layer don't change, but within the consensus spec, there's something we can change to be more compatible in the future with new transaction types. So if you're interested in typing, then just have a look.
Cool, and that's issue 2608 in the consensus specs. And then there was something that Trent put in the chat before we started. I think this is from Paul from Lighthouse, if that's correct. But he was wondering if there's any execution team that already has the latest APIs implemented. Yeah. Basically the engine API spec.
I have created an interface for it, and I started writing a fuzzer for it, but we haven't implemented it in Geth yet.
Okay.
Also, there were some questions regarding the interface that we already talked a bit about when I implemented it.
Okay. Anyone else have an update or?
About the same for Besu. We have the latest spec stubbed out for the moment. We're working on the implementation, but we're not ready.
Okay.
And we are not ready to. In Nethermind, we started working on the interfaces, but I think we have a good progress.
Cool.
Yeah, one another. I just wanted to repeat that. Yeah, stay tuned. We will just publish the spec version on this engine API. It'll be different to the design doc. I mean, yeah, some stuff, some details. But in general, it's the same interfaces.
Sweet. Yeah, we'll share that in Awkward Devs and maybe in the announcement channels as well on the R&D Discord for people to follow next week. Anything else on the merge before we move on? Okay. If not, we had a couple EIPs that people wanted to discuss. First one was 37. Oh, sorry, Mikael, did you say something? Oh, sync.
Yeah, I was just wondering, sync, yeah.
Oh. Did you have a specific question, or is it just asking where the teams are at?
I was like, yeah, this is an agenda. I'm not sure. I was just looking to get any updates if there are on the specs documentation on this draft design proposal. Felix? Yeah.
Felix is not on the call. I saw on Discord that he was working on updates to the document, but I haven't seen anything published yet.
Oh, yeah. So he had some dentistry going on, and so he wasn't really able to work this week. He's going to finish it next week.
Cool.
Yeah, and my question is like, is there plans of the client developers to implement the sync for the interop? And yeah, do you have capacities for that? Like, who's planning to do this?
So, from Get's perspective, Peter is, as far as I know, implementing that. But in order to do it, he is, doing some major refactorings that are needed before he can really get started on the new stuff. That's my question. Marius, do you have the same impression?
Yeah, so we need to implement some other stuff before we can start it with it, and but Peter is doing that right now. I'm not sure if we can actually make it until the merge, until the interop, but we should until the merge probably, but until the interop, but we should have at least some beta version that we can try, hopefully.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, hopefully, maybe at the beginning of October there will be enough R&D done that we can make better decisions about communication protocols and that kind of stuff at that point.
And I guess one thing that's just worth mentioning, I saw Peter say this week, is as part of these refactors within Geth to support kind of merge sync, fast sync is considered being dropped. So if you're a Geth user running fast sync, you should probably switch to snap sync going forward. I don't know, Marius or Martin, if that's roughly right.
Well, there's nothing really from a user perspective that you need to do.
Okay, it'll just stop being available.
Yeah. I mean, at some point, there will be nodes that serve get no data on the network, and if you then use an old Geth version and try to fast sync, you're going to be starved at some point in the future.
By dropping fast sync, do you mean dropping get node data?
Yes.
That would affect Nevermind ability to sync somewhat because we are still using that.
Yes. So we don't have a concrete PR. It's more of something that has been Peter has checked around a bit, and yeah, sooner or later it's going to be dropped. And it's been in the wind for a long time, but at some point it's going to be dropped, and we're not. I mean, we're moving over to Snapchat.
Yeah, it's understandable that it's not scaling extremely well. So we are planning either to implement SnapSync or either to move to more like Aragon style. I'm more in favor of implementing SnapSync, but with everything going on with the merge, etc., we haven't managed to do that yet.
Yeah, so please kind of keep an eye out for the announcements on that. And yeah, every client and I guess infrastructure or user should be moving over to moving away from FastSync at the very least.
And just for the people listening in, SnapSync is way faster than FastSync. It is way faster and takes way less bandwidth, and it's in all aspects superior to it, except in name. So.
Cool. Anything else on the merge?
Just a quick question for Martin. Do you know if we have merged Gary's PR about the transition process? Because that's going to be necessary too.
I don't know, sorry.
Okay, well, we need to check that.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, next up, Light Client wanted to give an update on EIP 3756, so the gas limit cap. Yeah, Light Client.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, we presented this at the last All Core Devs, didn't have a lot of time to discuss it. So just to briefly reiterate, the gas limit cap is motivated by putting an upper bound on what the gas limits can be set to by block proposers. In the benign case, high gas limits can increase the size of the state in history faster than we can sustain. In the malicious case, it amplifies attacks on clients. In the past, this hasn't really been a significant issue because miners have worked pretty diligently with all core devs to set gas limits, but they've shown in the last few months that they are potentially willing to be incentivized to increase limits beyond what may be considered safe. So this is an EIP proposal to set an upper bound on that limit. Is there any feedback on this?
Well, I know there are some people who are heavily opposed to this. Yeah, so I'd like to hear the cons from those people or general thoughts.
I can give the cons. The primary one is that it means that all core devs will have to actually come to consensus on a gas limit, the upper bound. Previously, we have kind of been able to shrug off having to make that decision. If we make this change, we will now have to officially make that decision as a group. And that then leads to, we need to then decide what is an acceptable rate of state growth. And there is a huge amount of diversity amongst client devs for what is reasonable in terms of state growth. And there's also, disagreement on just execution time per block, what's reasonable there. So I think the biggest con here is that we will be taking something that currently we can kind of ignore, or at least have plausible deniability of, and we're turning it into something that now we have to actually talk about and agree on, and it's a very, very hard decision.
Well, I think actually that all core devs will be fine at making the decision. My concern would be that it takes much longer. Like, how long does it take from an all core devs decision? Like, will it take an EAP every time, which take what, at least half a year or something?
Yeah, so when we want to increase it, we would need to do if this EIP passes and we want to, presumably would have some default, I'm guessing 30 million is a reasonable default. If we want to then change it later to something bigger, so 45 million or whatever, then we would need to have an EIP and then wait for the next hard fork and get it included in a hard fork.
I think there was an idea to make it automatically increase according to Moore's law or something like that. I think that would be a better idea overall, but yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt. But my question is basically, is this EAP, is it the motivation for it? Is it that we think that before the merge, miners are going to be like not have the long view on Ethereum and they just bloat the state and YOLO in the last time they have? Or is the motivation more longer than that? Is it, do you think that even in the future, when we're after the merge, that this is going to be needed or wanted or desirable?
I think that if those tokenomics work and that the hype around collecting tokens is around when staking's around, that stakers could easily be motivated as well to abuse the limit. There's maybe a bit of counteraction there because they have a longer term view, but I think a lot of them have machines that can easily run 40 million instead of 30 million and would do so at the cost of others. But I don't know, I can't speak for all the stakers, but I think the incentives are still there, even if you have, you know, a 4-year time horizon instead of a 1. But I think that's because they don't know all of the issues there.
So I think even with if the incentives were aligned, we still have the problem of education, where the people who are stakers aren't necessarily the same people who have a very, very deep understanding of the pros and cons of higher gas limits. Most people I talk to who are not core devs seem to, and even a lot of core devs have a belief that, you know, stake growth is not a problem. Yet, you know, there are definitely core devs, me very much included, who believe stake growth is a major problem. And so if group, stakers, be it miners, be it someone else, token voting, whatever, even if they are altruistic, it doesn't mean they're well informed. And so if we do decide to go that route, we would need to make sure we have some mechanism of ensuring those people are in fact well informed and educating them, which is, again, a hard problem. Like, I think all the options here are hard problems. To answer Martin's question, though, I do think that whatever rule we apply to miners, we should probably similarly apply to stakers. I think their incentive structures are similar. There is slightly longer time horizon, as Danny mentioned, but it's not that much longer. Like the stake growth problem, some aspects of the stake growth problem are on time horizons that are, you know, multi-years. And if you put your stake out in 3 months, then you might not care about the state of Ethereum in 3 years. Whereas if you just let stake growth grow indefinitely and we don't mitigate it effectively, you know, 3 years maybe when we really start paying for it.
Ansgar?
Yeah, just wanted to briefly point out that with this EIP, I think there would still be like a lot of room in how to use it, right? So because like say we set the upper limit at 30 million, that would actually basically be a recommendation of like going with 30 million unless we have technical issues where we temporarily reduce it or something. one alternative could also be to even like today set it at like say 40 million, 50 million, something like that, where like we don't recommend people to actually go that far, but it's like this is the limit where we still consider the network technically safe or something, right? And in that circumstance where we usually expect not to be at the limit, this kind of change would be much less invasive, while still giving like at least some upper bound, so there's no limitless like potential for catastrophe in a sense.
Right, and then it becomes more of a communication than technical challenge, right? Like saying we allow 40 million, but please don't use 40 million. Yeah.
I think as a kind of shelling point, 30 million is a reasonable start. But I just to give everybody a fair warning, I will argue to lower from that. I personally think the 30 million is too high for a number of reasons.
I have a question. Is there any update on the usage of EGL? Has there been voting? Has there been movement?
Haven't followed the voting as much, but I've looked at the mining pools that are still using it. It looks like 2 smaller pools are still sweeping rewards, Flex Pool and B Pool. F2 Pool was doing it in the beginning, and it looks like they didn't sweep rewards for a pretty long time, but I saw that they did sweep rewards a few days ago. So it's not clear exactly what their involvement still is, but there are 2 small mining pools that are actively sweeping rewards.
And another, I guess, thing that's worth mentioning is the gas limit is still 30 million, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, it's not currently being pushed upwards, but obviously that could change. Yeah.
Is anyone from Aragon on the call?
Yeah, it's me, Andrew. Well, I think our position is the same as before, that we are not in favor of this EAP, but if like the majority decides that we are going through with this EAP, then we are not going to fight, we are not going to die on that hill.
Oh, Ansgar?
Yeah, I have another question that would be is like if we were to move forward with this EAP, would the plan be to basically have it ready for the feature fork after the merge, or would the plan be to basically bundle the merge with basically as like the one exception to the rule of not having features as part of the merge, just so in case we need it earlier, it will already be implemented and ready for like a short notice emergency fork? I mean, again, with the understanding that we probably wouldn't do that unless it would start being a problem.
I think the question is more, are we trying to put it in Shanghai, or are we trying to do a soft fork before Shanghai?
Right, and knowing we also need to upgrade in December because of the difficulty bomb, right? Yeah. Marius, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I would oppose moving this into Shanghai or like the next fork, or just because I think we should really keep the fork as clean as possible. And if we were to include an EIP, it has to be like a hard consensus critical EIP, and I don't think that this EIP is security critical enough to do that. So I'm in favor of the EIP, but I would want to have the fork in November be as small as possible, and if we were to need something, that it would need to be security critical at this point, and not something that may be introduced in the future or something, maybe exploited in it.
I guess on that note, like it might be helpful to understand from client devs like how how much work would it be to activate this as a soft fork? So say that, 2 weeks from now we have a call and the block limit is up to, 40 million because of miners moving it up or EGL moving it up or whatever other reason. And it's felt that that's unsafe. How, given this is like a minimal change, how quickly can, this be deployed? Is it a matter of like weeks?
So how do you mean deploying it as a soft fork, really? If it's a soft fork, it's a minority fork, then it becomes bad.
Yeah, you still need to coordinate and get everyone to upgrade, especially if you picked 100 million and we were nowhere near it. Maybe you could argue doing a soft fork and it just like takes time for it to ripple out. But you would still need to coordinate like it's a hard fork, in my opinion.
The only benefit is I don't think you have to coordinate all of the user clients. It's more the hashing power.
Right.
Well, the user clients are the power against the hashing power in a soft fork.
Yeah, the hashing power might not want the fork, so you need the users to upgrade to enforce it.
Yeah, like users, exchanges, etc.
Yeah. And I guess, so given that, and given that basically, we need to have a fork, we have the fork in November, then we have the merge. Is this something that would be easy to, like, how much lead time would we need to add this to the November fork if we wanted to, right? Like, is this something that we'll need to deploy across all of the test nets? Yeah.
It's pretty trivial change.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that was what you were getting at. And
yeah.
It's the simple thing.
Yeah, because in that case, can we, and basically kind of following off Marius's comments around, keeping the merge as lean as possible, is this something that we can have a spec for that's kind of ready to implement? And if, we see an issue, we can combine it with either basically the November fork or the merge. Yeah.
Yeah, we can have it in the back pocket as a if we have to, and not otherwise schedule it as part of the Shanghai. That's possible.
I do want to mention, and I apologize if this is actually in the spec there, but I think it's implied to me that it wasn't because it's a soft fork. If the gas limit on mainnet is already above the target that we'd want to select, that you would actually need some sort of hard fork to discreetly change it to that point. Is that already covered in the EIP? I apologize if it is.
It's not. This is the main technical questions.
Okay, gotcha. So that
we could also make the soft fork so that it only accepts downvotes when when the limit is currently above. So that would be a soft
there's
fork
additional
enforcement.
complexity there, I guess.
But I do think that would be worth speccing kind of in advance.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a if we want to keep it in our back pocket as a reaction to an attack, then we need to have what the reaction is, because we have to assume that it's going to be above our target already.
Yes. So I guess, does that generally make sense to everyone as a next step? Not kind of, include this in any upgrade right now, spec out what the transition mechanism would look like to adjust it downward, and have this in case we need it either in November or around the merge.
I didn't quite understand the exact argument against bundling this in Shanghai.
I think there's not a lot of consensus. I think people feel a bit mixed about it.
So as I understand it, there is, wanting to keep the Shanghai, lean, wanting, like, I guess some core devs obviously being opposed to it and needing to come up with an actual value for it, which I guess we could default to 30 million. But yeah, those seem to be like the three.
Yeah.
my view is there's never really a good time exactly to do some of these things. And if we don't do it in Shanghai, it's already simple chains. There's not anything in Shanghai already. We're not going to do it during the merge, or likely not going to do it after the merge because there's a lot of other things to do. And so then it's going to be sitting around for a while, and the attack vector isn't going away. It's not clear how important it is for the security of the chain, but from my point of view, it seems like Shanghai is a good time to do it.
Right. Yeah, I guess one thing I don't know. Like, I know there's also other kind of EIPs on the agenda today that people wanted to discuss for Shanghai, and yeah, it does kind of feel like we had this consensus earlier to only focus on the merge at the very least until we have DevNets up for the merge. And you know, we're far enough in the implementations, and then kind of make decisions around, you know, what we do in November based on how much bandwidth we have. Yeah, so I think that the big concern I have is that it kind of sets a precedent where we, you know, move away from just being focused on the merge to starting to work on this and potentially other things, when we don't yet have the merge, you know, DevNets set up, and we don't have a good feel for like how much work is left to do on that. Yeah, I don't know what other client teams or developers. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mostly want to focus on the merge now and not have as much other features at all to think about.
And I do think, I don't know, from what I'm getting, the exception to that would be if we do see, you know, the gas limit being raised to like levels we consider unsafe on mainnet, having this already spec'd out, you know, like it would basically increase the urgency that we need this with, and having it already spec'd out would be valuable. But assuming the kind of urgency for it stays the same, it seems like it just might be better to focus on the merge exclusively until we're at least farther along with the implementation of it.
It feels like if we want to go down that path, we then need to come to some sort of agreement on what a dangerous level is. I believe there are some core devs who believe 30 million is a dangerous level already, due to some known DOS vectors against certain clients. Like, is 31 million safe? 39, 40, 45, 70? Like if we're going to say if people increase at dangerous levels, then we will do an emergency fork. That means we need to define in advance, I believe, what an emergency or what a dangerous level is. And so we still have to solve that part of the problem, even if we go down this path. Unless we're just saying, if the miners raise it above 30 million, then we emergency fork.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it seems to me like that's kind of the, I don't know, implicit consensus already, where like we have this limit and we sort of agreed to it around London. Yeah, so if it went like, you know, significantly above that, but yeah, I'm curious what others think.
Yeah, I don't think we necessarily. I mean, if our stance is, if this gives us problems, headache, then we might have to roll up the speed. I don't think we need to define exactly, you know, what is the definition of a problem headache, because I'm thinking that we will, if we have it, we will be able to say, yeah, this is not good, this is bad. But then I'm thinking most from the denial service perspective, and yeah, if you instead think about state growth, then sure. It would be good to define. I'm not sure how to measure that and collect that info to define what would be a problematic level.
Your mic, I think, was not great, Martin. I think what I got was that we can't really define like a specific number now, that if this becomes a problem, like in the future, we can have a fork for it. But I don't know if you want to maybe fix your mic, it was a bit low there.
Okay, is it any different?
Yeah, this is clearer.
Oh, sorry. Well, from a denial of service perspective, I don't think we need to predefine what would be a problem or how a problem would look like, because we would notice if we become bitten by denial of service attacks. But from a state growth perspective, if that is the concern, then I'm not sure, exactly that, how to define what are dangerous levels of state growth and what are okay levels of state growth. I have no idea.
Ansgar?
Yeah, I'd personally be in favor of at least stating clearly or trying to come to an agreement clearly that we would we consider participation in EGL to raise the gas limit kind of illegitimate, and like even if we wouldn't immediately act, right, because there's definitely some room above 30 million where it wouldn't immediately become problematic in any sense, but just because this is like a slippery slope situation where maybe 32 million is still okay for state growth and maybe 33 is, but maybe 34 isn't or something, right? And like just because if we signal ambivalence, I think a lot of miners will be much more interested in the future to kind of be involved there. And I think at least basically stating very clearly that we would very much expect them to not participate and not raise it above 30 million. And if they do, we basically will likely do something about it, even if like there's probably some room where if it's only a little bit, we might just not bother to look into it or something. But I feel like if we basically signal that there's some room before we would act, then that does implicitly just like make it an endorsement, I think, in a sense. So I think that's dangerous.
I'm fine plus wanting that. I don't know about others. Like, I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone.
I'm fine moving on to the next things in the call. I'm still of the mindset that I would like to see it in Shanghai, but I understand it seems like that's the minority view.
Any other thoughts? Okay. Cool. So moving on. Alex had 2 EIPs that he wanted to discuss. One is EIP 3855, which is a push 0 instruction. And then the other one is EIP 3680, limit meter and init code. Alex, do you want to give a quick overview of them?
Yeah, I will give an overview of the push 0 and Pavel about the init code. So the init code, the push 0 is a very simple one. It just introduces a new instruction which pushes the constant 0 onto the stack. And this is specified in a way that it can actually be implemented in the same place where the rest of the pushes are implemented, because most of the EVMs implemented such that they just have the starting opcode and the current opcode, and they just subtract it, so they know how many bytes to read. In the case of push 0, they don't need to read anything. So that's on the technical side, and then regarding the motivation, I think the EIP does a pretty good job explaining the motivation, and I will try to replicate it here, but probably I won't be as good as what we put into writing. But basically, there are a lot of cases where someone needs to push 0 onto the stack. A good example is calls. Since return data has been introduced quite a few years ago, many of the calls would just end up with at least 2 zeros at the very end, which would be the pointer and size for the return memory. Because people are not using that anymore, they'd rather use the explicit return data opcode to retrieve the data. So that's one good example to see where the zeros are used, but there are many more cases. And the problem we have seen, so we have been motivated by looking at actual bytecode on the network, as well as talking to Solidity and some challenges they face in this regard. So basically, pushing a 0 can be done at least can be done in many different ways. One way is just with the push instruction, which means that is 2 bytes and it costs 3 gas. But one can also use a dup if in case it was already on the stack that also costs 3 gas. And these are like the clean and nice ways to do it. But people are always looking at to save gas. So there are certain other instructions which in certain cases can return 0. So one example is return data size. In case there has been no return data, it would be 0. Call data size the same, and plenty of others here listed in the IP. So in many cases, contracts and people start to use these just in order to save gas, because some of these only cost 2 gas at runtime and they only 1 byte, so they're cheaper to deploy. And the one problem we have seen with this is this kind of puts us in a position that certain changes would be harder to do. One example was the transaction packages, which would change the behavior of return data size. So that's one reason why this this optimization is like a bad direction for many people to go. And another reason is what's happening in Solidity. The team is looking for like the new code generator to have like a nice way to push like a known value in the cheapest possible way, and they don't really want to go to the extent to try to use these other instructions. And then lastly, we also did an analysis on how much gas has been wasted on this, and we only looked at all the bytecode deployed and how many push 1.0 instructions they had, so which is like the 6000 in hex. And according to that, it seems that I think like 60 billion gas. Let me just check it quickly. Yeah, 68 billion gas has been wasted so far on deploying such code. So that's the long motivation.
That's a lot of gas. Does anyone have thoughts, comments on this?
Cute EAP. I don't think it's like, I mean, like a lot of these EAP that touches something about the EVM. It's nice and not terribly difficult to implement, but neither is it screamingly important. So yeah, I'm kind of in favor of it, but I'm not. Yeah, I'm not wildly in favor. I think that sums it up. I'm lukewarm.
Right.
I feel like this is hard because there's lots of small changes that slowly improve the EVM, and none of them are necessarily screaming, this needs to immediately go in. And so how do we like, you know, have at a higher level drive the protocol to improving EVM?
Right. I think this is, you know, kind of the higher level conversation where we have these things like, say, the merge, which is obviously very important. And, you know, after the merge, there's going to be other like kind of really important things to do in the protocol. And, you know, it does feel like we have like a pretty strong consensus about not doing any changes before the merge, but yeah, I think not necessarily today, but we need to figure out how do we keep making these improvements in the EVM. And this is not the only one. There's Alex has proposed EIP 3540, which was very popular. There's been 3074, which also had like a lot of community support.
Yeah, but in the end, I mean, I'm in favor of it, and I wouldn't mind including this in a future fork because it's so easy to implement and easy to test. No, I mean, there are no corner cases to screw up on, basically.
Your comment was just
intuitively the marginal value of this feels very low. Like I am really surprised somehow. Like just reserving even one opcode for this seems a lot. Just to save one byte.
Andrew, you have your hand up as well.
Yes, so from my point of view, I'm in favor of this EIP. I have a suggestion. Maybe when we can create tentatively a placeholder for hard fork after the merge, and we can tentatively approve EIPs that can go into the next post-merge fork. What do you think?
Right. I think that generally makes sense. It feels like it's maybe a bit early for that just because we're again like at the very beginning of implementing the merge. But I don't know. Yeah, I do agree that like when we're gonna start, having the merge implemented, it makes sense to look at what's after, and we already have like a pretty long list of proposals. I mentioned a couple, and they're all I've like purposefully left them all open in the Ethereum PM repo. So we have like a pretty long list of ones that basically all asked for Shanghai, and I think we have consensus that like assuming the fork in November to move back the difficulty bomb is called Shanghai. It seems like we don't want to add any other features to that, but we have a lot of features that like are valuable that we want to do after the merge. Yeah, I'm just not sure what's like the right time to start discussing that. It feels like it's probably a bit early, but we probably don't want to wait super long either. I guess Alex, to give a quick summary because you dropped off, it seems like people are like, weakly in favor of the proposal. It seems like we don't want to do it before the merge. And it seems like there's also a desire to start thinking more deeply about what we want to do after the merge, given this and all the other proposals that are pending. Anything else on this EIP? Okay. The next one then was EIP 3860.
Hi, yeah, Pavel here. I should take care of this one. So this EIP mostly limits, add some limits to the init code size and additional cost to it. Just to like quick background, before EVM can execute any code, it needs to do jumbless analysis of the code. And this cost of this analysis is not directly reflected in anywhere. And this is partly limited by two factors. First one, the call or create cost is quite high. So the kind of limit the attack vector, and also deployed code has size limit. So analysis of the deployed code is at least capped by this limit. And for init code, there's no limit, so this is unbounded, and the sizes can be in megabytes in practice. I mean, in like attacking scenarios. So previously there was like a previous version of this concept, EIP 2677, which only introduces the size limit for init code. And at some point we realized that currently in Create2 there's a precedence for charging additional gas for init code size, which is related to the requirement of hashing the init code. And we want to include the similar mechanism for init code in general. So this EIP proposes charging two gas per init code word size. For reference, Create2 already charges 6 gas for that. So that would be increased to 8, and for Create, like regular Create, the cost should be 2, and the costs were taken from the performance of current GEF implementation of the jumpness analysis. It's in our opinion is quite low. Yeah, that's mostly the description of the IP.
Thanks. Oh, Martin.
Yes. So yeah, I'm one of the co-authors, so obviously I'm in favor. But what I wanted to add was that I've been basically wanting to have something like this for a number of years. That's why I wrote the limitation of init code EIP earlier. That one is a bit of a hack, and I think it's not great. This EIP is more rigorous. It actually adds a linear cost, which is proper because it is. I think it is currently a denial of service vector against Ethereum, which we should fix, and we should have fixed it a couple of years ago. But yeah, we're here now. That's it.
Thanks for sharing. I'm curious, anyone else have thoughts on this?
Well, it might actually relate to the merge, where in the merge we have this consensus type to describe a transaction, which has a maximum size. So I suppose that you just want these kind of bounds on transactions as well as init code in internal transactions, and basically everywhere have like a proper bound.
Right. So I guess, I don't know, Martin and Powell, are you proposing this should be coupled with the merge? Just
so I just firstly I want to confirm it's like I don't know the other thing mentioned, but I think it should work more or less the same. So there might be some coordination if that's required. It also, the IP also applies the cap on the transaction, if I recall correctly, and for internal calls. Yeah, and in terms of when it should happen, I actually don't have strong opinions about that. I don't think it's my job to decide this, but I think I will leave to others.
Yeah, does anyone else have thoughts on this? I guess just because, oh, Marius, I see you're off mute. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, probably a bit unfair because I'm also in the Geth team, but I would also like to have this in as soon as possible. One thing we might need to look at is the increase in gas cost to 2 gas I know that some clients are way worse in their jump test analysis, so it might make sense to increase the gas cost even more. But I think like the limitation of init code size is a no-brainer for me. I think that should go in either way, and the gas cost increase should go into.
So I guess it does seem like, I don't know, the Get team, given I guess Martin is an author and the authors are like most familiar with this, does it make sense to just kind of give everybody 2 weeks to familiarize themselves with this and see what I guess all the client team's thoughts are about including this alongside the merge? I did like the idea of like, you know, having a precedent that we don't accept something into an upgrade on the same call it's proposed, just to make sure people have time. Yeah, Axic, you have your hand up.
I was wondering why should this go in with the merge and maybe not before, so like in Shanghai, just to reduce the scope of the merge.
Oh, good point. I suspect, I guess one reason I can think of, and please let me know if this is wrong, is if we include this in the merge, we're going to have testnets for the merge regardless. If Shanghai is just a difficulty bomb pushback, we don't need to deploy that across all the testnets. So that's one reason I can think of. But yeah, there might be others. And yeah, I guess there's a comment by Light Client about like adding 3680 is bigger than obviously the 2 other EIPs we discussed. And it seems, I guess from what I'm getting, is like the Get team feels there's like a kind of security risk, and Proto mentioned there might be just a better, I guess, interaction with how the beacon chain is already set up. Yeah, so that's seems to be the rationale.
I guess my understanding of the pushback against the other two simpler EAPs is that if we wanted to have Shanghai not have any features, the initial energy required to have other features in the fork was great enough to not include these like relatively simple EAPs. But if people want to do 3860, then there has to be effort put into building out the tests. Then it seems like the marginal cost of also adding 1 or 2 of these other EAPs is incredibly small because the decision has already been made to have features into the fork. Is that a misunderstanding?
But are you referring to Shanghai?
Shanghai or the merge.
Right.
I am personally fairly opposed to including anything in the merge that doesn't need to absolutely go in, but I'm specifically curious about Shanghai.
Yeah, so my understanding, again, sorry, go ahead, Marius.
I would also be opposed to putting this in the merge. I was thinking about Shanghai for this EAP.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it. Sorry, so I got that wrong. I do think in that case, yeah, your argument is probably good. Like client, where like, yeah, if we are gonna set up infrastructure for Shanghai with this, then it basically becomes a proper feature fork, and we need testing, and we need to deploy across the test nets and whatnot, and that's, yeah, that's like a much bigger overhead.
Is that other people's understanding?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, Alex?
But are you saying that for the difficulty bomb, you wouldn't even set up a testnet, just launch it as it is? The difficulty bomb update?
I think that's what we did in the past, but I might be wrong there. But I think from your Glacier, we didn't set up a testnet, right? Because none of the testnets have difficulty bombs. So we would add reference tests, but I don't think we would spin up a test.
Right. Or rather, yeah, exactly. they don't have proof of work. So yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is kind of the big difference is if we just push back the difficulty bomb, it's something we can only release for mainnet and literally not have an upgrade on testnets. And then if we do have anything else, we need to be on the testnets, and that also implies that kind of the work has to be done much sooner, because say we wanted to fork mainnet mid-November with the difficulty bomb, that means that like at least a month before, ideally we fork the testnet, so that's like mid-October. And that basically means you want releases out. You would want releases out for clients in like 2 weeks, like early October. And that just seems kind of unrealistic time-wise. Yeah. So I'm not sure. I don't know. I struggle to see how we would put anything in Shanghai at this point, which is not, which has to go through a full testnet deployment. And one thing I can do in the next 2 weeks is I can just double check the difficulty bomb calculations and whatnot, to see if anything has changed. But as I understand it, it's supposed to go off, early December. And I think no one wanted to fork like around the holidays. So it's like, yeah, as I understand it today, kind of the latest we could have a mainnet upgrade is December. That means like November is the latest we're done with testnets, and that means on October we basically need fully tested releases out, and that's like 2 weeks from now.
Are people strongly in favor of trying to put 3860 in Shanghai?
Sorry, what order is Shanghai?
Let's call that the December fork, just for.
Yeah, I would be strongly in favor of including this. I would be curious to hear from Besu and Nethermind what they feel about the init code and the cost of that.
So we Nethermind recently optimized it a bit, looking at the gef code. So I would say we are, in case of like vulnerabilities, more or less at the same level. Of course, there's some maybe runtime overhead or something, but generally, I agree that this probably needs to be done, but I don't have that. I wasn't the one doing the analysis, so I don't have that strong opinion. So we are right now running.
Any other thoughts?
I would say it's crucially important to do this, and not only because of the current clients, but also because of some other clients. So,
what does the timeline look like to make this happen then, if we want to do this in Shanghai?
I think we would need, like, we're already at time today. I think we would need to be like 100% in agreement on the next call, and that's like the absolute latest we could do it. I can kind of, I can look into, into what, like with the difficulty bomb and whatnot, what it would look like. But yeah, that's my understanding is like we can't really go past next call to make a decision on that, because then it'll be mid-October. And that just seems way too late.
Is it possible to make a decision now, or do we really want to wait, or make a decision in 1 week rather than 2?
Right.
I don't think we should make a decision now. I think that's too early and would set a bad precedent.
Okay.
I think every client team that wants it, that's in favor of it, should implement it until next week, and then maybe have some discussions over the all core dev channel or something. I don't really want to have another all core dev meeting next week, because I think it's also bad if we have them every week. And
yeah, and I think the fact that these proposals are also kind of new, I'm like less inclined to have like an off schedule meeting where we just put them in and, yeah, I do think like people watch these calls, they read the notes take a couple of days to come out. So I think there's value in like discussing it on the Discord over the next 2 weeks, but and yeah, teams who think this is really important, having at least a preliminary implementation, and yeah, we can make a call on the next Awkward Devs. We're already
Okay.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Oh, I was just agreeing.
Okay, yeah, we're already at time. I guess couple just announcements before we wrap up. Get put out a postmortem on the split that happened when they basically announced that there was a vulnerability that they'd patch. This is linked in the Alcor Devs agenda. You can read it there. There's there's 3 other kind of EIPs we didn't have time to discuss that are not urgent. If people want to have a look async, those are also linked in the agenda. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.